right, and welcome back to Dynamics Unplugged. We are at the midway point of our series, Dynamics 365 Dynamics A to Z. Today we're at the letter M. We actually missed a day yesterday, so we're going to double up today. It's going to be a 2 for Tuesday. We're going to do the letter M, and then we're going to get into the letter N. So starting off with the letter M, you're all probably guessing that I'm going to do something with master planning, whether that's min-max or a similar type of setup, but we're not. We're going to start with manufacturing execution, an area that's probably not talked about enough with Dynamics, whether that's using the out-of-the-box functionality or even integration with a third-party system. Today, we are going to focus on what is available out of the box right now in Dynamics. If I look under the production control module, there is a whole submenu called manufacturing execution. And what you can see available is 3 different interfaces: the job card terminal, the job card device, and the latest addition, which is production floor execution, as well as handle messages, and then some subforms for viewing and doing inquiries like production jobs and project activities. I'm going to start off with the job card terminal. And you can see here it's asking me to select a design or a configuration, meaning I might not have a default one, or I'm asking the user to select which configuration to log into. There are ways to set that up, which I will get to in review as well. For now, I'm going to choose the configuration and click OK. The next form that it's opening is it's telling me to select the resource in action. If you imagine you're a production worker, you're logging into a specific cell or a machine or assembly area to begin work on a job at that area. So you're selecting the production unit and the job that you're going to log into. And then I'm asking the person to scan their badge ID or their personnel number. And this is because it is a terminal station. Many workers use it. They're not the only worker using that. So scan my badge ID. I'm presented with an input form, and it's very similar to other forms in Dynamics. It's grid-based. It's best suited for a keyboard and mouse, really. It's not suited for hands-on screen and many workers using, but it can be used that way. We'll talk about this option as well as the job card device and the production execution interface. So starting here with the job list for resource, you can see I have all these jobs that are at the particular work center that I logged into to perform these jobs. They show in a certain sequence that could be set by my manager. We can see what the requested quantities are for these. If I'm recording good and error quantities and those already have progress reported against them, those would display here. I see the production or batch order number. I can see if the job has been started already, what's remaining, the job type. Is it a process job? Is it a setup job? Is it currently in progress or not? And if so, who's the worker that's clocked into it? At the top under my action ribbon, I have certain things I can perform, certain tasks I can perform. For example, if I were to select this third row here, I could put in a start quantity of 12 and actually start this job, log into this job. I could log in as an assistant to a job. I could clock out for the day, take a break. Under view, I have variance inquiries I can pull up, like balances or my logbook, indirect activities that I could perform, like logging into meetings or other registrations that we allow. All of this is actually configurable. So what you're seeing is a fairly standard demo setup, but the naming conventions, the sequence these display, you don't have to rely on a user personalizing this to get what you want out of it. If you want to simplify this screen or you want to provide all of the options available in this form, that's configurable. So I'm going to open my other tab, and under production control in the setup area, you can see there's 2 forms: configure job card terminals and configure job card devices. We'll start there. We're gonna come back to the production control module to look at all the setups for manufacturing execution. These 2 setups are actually in the time and attendance module. Apologies. You can access them from production control as well, but I'm accessing them from the time and attendance module. So starting with the job card terminals. I logged into the default configuration, which is the first option you saw me choose when I opened that menu. It prompts us for the production area. If this wasn't selected, it wouldn't have asked me to log into the resource that I chose, resource 120. This could be locked to a specific employee. Once they log in, it's on their user account. Do we want to use the actual time of registrations? Do we want to allow locking the touch screen so we can sanitize it, meaning somebody can clean it without buttons accidentally getting pressed? What page they start on? I'm starting on the production page. You might use the job card terminal for indirect activities as well, like meetings, project-based activities. You might only want to see current activities or jobs assigned to that user. So this is configurable at the top. In the middle section, we define the appearance. All of our menus and submenus, do we want to start with them hidden, expanded, or minimized? What do we want to display to the user? Preview pane, status, current activities, and messages. So here, for example, do we want this part to be expanded? Do we want these sub details to be expanded? If there's messages against any of these jobs, do we want that to be presented to the user? Then in the grid, what are the default setups that we're going to have in the grid? And you'll see more of this when I get into the action pane and the setup of grids in one moment, but we can have different formats and different options for different configurations because different workers might need to see different pieces of information based on what their job is. So here I have indirect activities, production jobs, and project activities. No workers are assigned to this job card terminal by default. If they were, I wouldn't have been asked to choose a terminal configuration when I first logged in. Once you have that base set up, you can begin creating your action panes and your grids. There's a default look you can see here. If I click on production, there's action pane, manage activities as a header, and then these subheaders, job list, report feedback, activities, time and attendance registration. That's the same that we're seeing here at the top. I have job list, activities, report feedback, and time and attendance registration. And then underneath those, I have buttons. I have action buttons and tasks those users can perform that we can see here. I can update those configurations. I can remove configurations or buttons that aren't needed for users if we want to have simplified views and more complex views. Maybe a supervisor sees a lot more than a regular registration worker. I also might want to change the labels. Maybe the Microsoft Dynamics terminology is not what I want to use, and I want to label these something that's more relevant for my business. So for report feedback, do we change that to report progress? Or something like production and production orders, are we changing those to say work order or batch order? Whatever terminology makes sense for our workers, we can update those labels. When I go back and I do the setup of grids now, it's very similar. We can see what columns are going to display in this grid: error quantity, good quantity, requested quantity, and resource, and so on. If I come back to my form, I see select error quantity, good quantity, requested quantity, and resource. And when those display, are they in the column section? Are they in this middle grid, or are they in the preview down here below where we show bits of information without going fully into that record? Those can also have labels updated. So once again, maybe I want to call resource work cell, or I want to call it production unit, whatever term makes sense to my business. Maybe instead of product name, it's item name. Instead of production order, it's work order. Instead of remaining quantity, it's quantity left, or whatever makes sense to your business. Tailor that, make that more relevant for your users, easier to understand for the users, make the adoption of that form more similar to other things you do in the business. So that job list is super configurable in the manufacturing execution. our job card terminal. Next, we have the job card device, a different interface. So if I come here, we have a configure job card for devices option. And you can see I got an error that said I had no configuration for this user. So what we'll do is we'll add my user. All right, so we've added my user as an assigned user. The configuration for this particular job card device, I don't force anyone to report a quantity at clock out. We do lock the employee to the screen after they log in. Do we have an attached barcode scanner job card device to use to scan a job as the worker clocks in? Do we want to use the actual time of registration? Allow workers to set personal filters, all these different parameters we can configure that will be used. So we'll go back now. We will refresh the form. Now that I have set a default configuration for that user, we can go back to our production control module and choose job card device this time. I am asked to enter my badge ID once again. This form was more optimized for an actual terminal or a touch screen. You can see there's large buttons versus a grid where you're entering data or typing data or selecting data. So more optimized for users on the shop floor who are handling these materials or starting jobs at machines. It's also a very tailored experience. These buttons and what they're called and labeled can be changed, and the access to them can be changed as well. So here as a worker, I'm being shown this one job. I can start that job. I can toggle through to the next job. I'm not seeing that full selectable list. I'm being displayed more a job at a time, but I can apply filters. I can focus just what's on assigned to me if I need to. So I had a configuration filter on. It's only showing me what was at that one production unit resource that was assigned to me. Here I could do the same toggling that we saw in the first form in the job card terminal and start to navigate that way if we allow the user to do that. So now I'm going to a different machine, starting and looking at those jobs. I do have the ability to place other actions similarly as well. So here would be starting an indirect activity, clocking into a meeting or an equipment repair, taking a break, and you might have different break types, or clocking out, going to a different resource, or clocking out for the day. So leaving here, I'm going to actually clock out. Back to our configurations. We've done configure job card terminals and configure job card devices. If we go to the production control module under our setup, we have those same two options, but we also have configure production floor execution. This is what's going to be used in the new interface. I've done a video on this interface before. This is a much smoother experience, optimized for touchscreen, optimized for the floor, optimized to really enhance the user experience. It works well with some of the other new forms. It looks similar to some of the other new technology that you've seen out there. So I only have one default configuration for production floor execution. You could have multiple. You might have some that are clock in and clock out only. If you're salary workers, but you do want to use D365 or recording when they clock in and clock out every day, you could set them up. You could set up other types of workers who are needed in manufacturing and still calculate time against them. Here, I'm actually using this default setup for production workers. Do you want to enable search? There's enhanced search capabilities to search on production order or job ID. Typically, we'd recommend using that. It's very, very helpful. I've demoed that feature in the past. Do you want to enable search by project ID if we are performing project-related jobs within the production execution interface? And then similarly to the terminals and job card devices we saw, are there any auto open dialog boxes or reporting that we're enforcing? A little bit different from perhaps the other screens. We can see, do we want to enable a numpad for the user here? Do we want to generate license plates? So if we're reporting as finishing for production and using warehouse management, do we want to generate license plates? There are labels we can trigger from production execution. And then what tabs display? So once again, controlling the tabular layout of the form. And underneath those are design tabs. We might have an active jobs view that only shows active jobs in progress. We might have all jobs, might have my jobs, where I only want that user to see what is assigned to them and not all jobs. So a very tailored experience, similar to the terminals and the devices, but with an updated UI, an updated interface. So now we'll check out that UI. We'll go to production control, manufacturing execution, production floor execution. My device isn't configured yet. I hadn't logged into it in this particular environment, so I'll quickly configure it. The configuration is similar to what we were seeing. Do you have multiple layouts for the production execution interface? In my setup, no, I don't. So I'll select the default. Select next, then I'm going to log into my production unit, resource group, or resource that could be tied to the user and defaulted. A lot of times if you're on a central terminal machine, you want that to default. You don't want them to be able to select a separate production unit, but you can if needed. So the more I define, the less jobs I'm going to see that are granular to that particular setup. But if I only put in a production unit, I could see all jobs for all resource groups and resources. Additionally, I could leave this blank and I would see all jobs for all production units, resource groups, and resources in that particular legal entity. And then I'm really relying on the search capabilities to find the job that I need to do. Here, we'll actually filter down. There are 46 not started jobs, 60 stopped, and 2 in progress at that particular resource. Scan my badge ID, and I'm clocked in. You can see this interface is very different. It's much more updated and modern. I have the same options in terms of being able to take activities and leave, being able to see my day, starting jobs, bundling jobs, instructions. All that configuration is fairly common across these 3 different UI options for reporting production in manufacturing execution. Here is the search capabilities in the production execution form that I mentioned earlier. You might have to enable a feature in feature management if you didn't see that parameter in the setup in the configuration. This allows us to search on production ID and job ID, because this form might not be sequenced in the best case. If you have hundreds of jobs, it might not be realistic for a manager to go through and prioritize in perfect sequence. So you're relying on your physical paperwork with the job ID. That might be a route card or a picking list or a production traveler that has a barcode on it with either the batch order number or the job ID number with a barcode. And that's what you're scanning to find the job. So for example, we can see P000129. If I'm typing it, but if I had scanned that, we can immediately see the 3 jobs for that production order that display here that are all happening. And I could start those or select those. So the search capabilities allow me to filter down to what's required, and you can see it even shows the number there as how many jobs matched that unique ID. Here are the tabs that we saw in the setup: active jobs and my jobs. So right now I don't have anything assigned to me or that I'm actively clocked into. You can see my day. This is going to show me what registrations I've performed. For me personally, I've just clocked in and clocked out. I haven't actually performed any jobs. I could go back in time to see other days as well. So I'm able to kind of have progress against my registrations performed that day. And then similarly, I can leave. I can clock out of my terminal, of my production execution interface. I'm done with manufacturing for today and log out of that interface. And the final thing I'll show now that we've reviewed the job card terminals, devices, and production floor execution interfaces, are the manufacturing execution parameters. There are some base parameters to set up. Do we use the badge ID? You saw on all the forms I used a badge ID instead of a personnel number. Do we use a password? Maybe every user wants a unique password instead. Some default values for different parts of manufacturing execution, project IDs, number sequences, and so on. Production order defaults, though, is a big area. A lot of this is maintained in terms of the steps that a user performs in manufacturing. I have 10 operations on a production order. Somebody picks up the paperwork for production order 1, 2, 3, and we're not sure which operation it's on. We want to enforce control so that a user can't accidentally clock into jobs out of sequence, or we want to set validation so that we can't report is finished more than we started or less than we started, and you want to have tolerances and rules around it. That's what your production order defaults is going to control. People forget how this affects manufacturing execution and reporting of some of the time. So under the general tab is this parameters by site or by company. When we use job bundling, when we are processing multiple work orders at the same time under the same work user, how do we want to bundle that time? Do we take the net time? Do we take each job individually? Do we take the estimated time? Because I worked on 5 jobs over an hour. I didn't do 5 hours of work. So how do we want to associate that time when we write back job cards or route cards to that production order? Are we posting the time automatically or just creating the journals? Are we creating job card journals or route card journals? Cost categories, are they being used? Dimensions, are they being written to the job or the worker or based on the worker? Sorry, financial dimensions when you want to post your journals. And then we get into validations at the start and stop and what information can be recorded. Do we want the user to update the status and the quantity of the work order or just the status? Do we want them to be able to open the picking list journals and edit them, or are we only using manufacturing execution for time entry? Do we actually start the production order? The default journals that post. For operations, what are they actually recording time against? Is it just process jobs, or is it process and setup and queue time and overlap and transfer and so on? Do we allow assistants to use secondary operations and act in teams? And then as a report is finished, do we also allow them to update status and quantity or just status? What are the default cards and posting that's used? Do we accept error? Do we end job? Similar to what you see in production order defaults for standard manufacturing in the client interface. And then quantity validation, both for individual operations and the production order itself. At start, when we start the first operation, is there any validation? Do we only want to allow the user to start the production planned quantity, or can we allow them to start any quantity? For operations after the first operation, do you want to validate that they can only start what was started on the previous operation or finish on the previous operation? And do we want to accept any deviation from that? And then same thing on feedback. When I start to report feedback against an operation or the production order, do we accept surpluses and shortages or not? Those quantity validations are very important. They're a big part of manufacturing execution. So there you have it. That is the letter M, manufacturing execution. We looked at 3 different interfaces that can be used with manufacturing execution: the job card terminal, the job card device, and the production floor execution interface. We didn't even touch upon manufacturing execution system integration, where you might be using a third-party system for this, and that is very common as well. We'll be back with the letter N later today in Dynamics Unplugged, Dynamics A to Z. See you next time.